Lead by inspiring, lead by experience, lead by example, lead by. The Leadership Podcast brought to you by Ezeni. My name is Matt Stancombe and I'm your host, bringing you thought-provoking, inspirational chat every month. Hear from leaders, business owners, coaches and subject matter experts from across a variety of industries. So however you consume your podcasts, turn up the volume, relax, and above all, enjoy this month's guest. Hello again, Lead By listeners. Thank you for tuning in for another episode. This time I'm joined by Emeritus Professor Jim Saker. Jim is a very accomplished and busy man, as you'll hear during this chat. Now the president of the Institute of the Motor Industry, he is a long-standing professor of retail management with a close and influential working relationship within the automotive sector. Jim is among the top most influential people in the sector right now and a regular columnist in automotive management. This was a super chat in which we cover not only traditional leadership requirements, but behaviours and skills required by anyone looking to be influential in the evolving automotive landscape. So let's go over to that conversation now. Welcome, Jim. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And thanks for joining me. I guess we should start with your background. I'm sure those that are in the industry who are listening to this will know you by name, your background and where you've influenced the majority of the industry, but let's just cover the bases just to be safe.
Okay. I was brought up down the Old Kent Road in London. I came out of South London via the motor industry and the academic route. I ended up at Loughborough University after a circuitous route. And I suppose the claim to fame is that in 1996, we launched the world's first degrees in retail automotive management, originally with Ford Motor Company. And they invested very heavily on the campus. After 5 years, we went all makes. So we had people from all around the industry. We offered programs in the Far East, in Singapore, and drew on candidates from Thailand, Indonesia, those types of places, and also ran programs in the Middle East. And so that's been the sort of academic and the motor industry side.
Yes.
Surprisingly, a few years ago, I was invited to become president of the Institute of the Motor Industry. And I've been working in that sort of area, trying to develop the industry further. And as a sideline, I chair the Women's Professional Basketball League in the UK. Which
sounds like it doesn't leave you a lot of room to do anything else when you've got that much coverage. You're a busy man.
It is fairly busy. Bear in mind, officially as Emeritus Professor, you're retired. So I still have a desk at Loughborough and I still teach and do some research. Yeah. But I do have more freedom than I had before.
So in the 90s, when you were saying that you kicked off an important milestone for the industry in terms of recognition academia in the automotive space, what was happening before then? Why did that suddenly happen, and what led you to be a key member in that?
Well, I had some experience in the motor industry, and also at Loughborough, we had some experience in retail. And at the time, I think Ford were looking at the situation and they were having difficulties developing their what they called CMAs, the sort of marketing areas, and they were looking at multi-location retail opportunities. And that was becoming a challenge for the people involved. Generally speaking, and historically, the industry has not attracted graduate people coming into the sector. And the quality of management at the top was actually reasonably poor because the industry had been very successful doing certain things. But when challenges come, you need the ability to adapt and transform your thinking. And at that time, I think Ford were looking to say, look, we're going to deliver retail in a different sort of way. Therefore, we need something to support our managers at that particular time to go forward. And that kind of just built a momentum that people realised there was a need to improve management and leadership in the sector.
Yeah, it's. I've said on the podcast before, my background has been automotive since I left school, and I've grown up through the different phases and energies of the industry. And it's safe to say that in my early career, the way that businesses and organisations were run was very different to what it is today. But it's very much a slow movement in the automotive space.
I think it was, when I first got involved, it was very much command and control. There was very much the top knew supposedly what was going on, And to be fair, the industry was fairly predictable, and there were processes involved, and there was a great deal of control. You had like Pendle as a sales process, that type of thing, where it's all to do with you have this process, you follow the process, and you shift metal. It wasn't the focus on customers was less. It was more to do with the profitability and performance within the business itself.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Pendle process. I sort of grew up on that in my early years, and later in my career into leadership training and product training, and a marked difference in approach because manufacturers had switched on, and that would have been led by your early work in the 90s. But very much then that switched to actually we need to think about customers here, and less so on profitability, because if you look after the customers and you have happy employees, the rest becomes quite simple, or so it should.
Yeah, it should be an outcome of what you've done on the other side, but that never seemed to be the view at the time. It was very much we control, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And I think it has changed dramatically. It's over the last 25, 30 years, you've just seen a real transformation taking place.
A slur that I've often heard in the industry is the salespeople of the 70s and 80s, or managers of the 70s and 80s. Now, I'm fortunate enough, I guess, to be, despite the hair loss, young enough to have not had to live maybe in that period. So with your experience and, again, the differences in training, leadership and development, what was that period like, and why was it so starkly different from what we now see today, which is customer-centric CSI improvements and things like that?
Well, I think the issue was at the time the business was successful. The people bought cars. There had been a transformation in 1971 when Ted Heath took competition credit control away, which basically meant that up until 71, nobody bought a car on what was the HP or hire purchase. So what you had was this massive influx and demand for vehicles. And they had, over that period of time, people developed different finance schemes to make it work, to sell cars on an incremental payment basis as opposed to a one-off payment. And as a result of that, it's from 71 that the people like the Toyota and Nissan and others, Honda, came into the UK in the 80s. So there was a dynamic that was saying we had a demand here, which had been suppressed for a number of years up until the 70s. And we traded on that for a number of years afterwards, that demand was there. And it was into the 90s, when 20 years later, when people were going, actually, this is becoming more tough. The market is more saturated. There's we need to fight more for customers. And it wasn't going to be simply sales-led.
So again, fast forward into the 90s and that sort of transitional period where we're looking at volume, profitability, and the starting point of customer satisfaction surveys and influence over customer impression. What were you doing particularly with the university to start to influence that culture and think about how the modern leader needed to behave and look?
Well, it's becoming apparent from other sectors that there was challenges being faced, and people were comparing the automotive industry with what was happening in other areas, and people going, well, this doesn't seem right. You still had the Arthur Daly legacy. When we first started, it was Arthur Daly Goes to College. And I was ridiculed, because people said, what do you mean car dealers going to a university? And, Loughborough is a top 10 university. How does this work? And I remember in one of the motor industry magazines, they had a queue of people going into Loughborough University with L plates on their back, that sort of thing. It was that sort of feel that it was saying, is this realistic? Is this right? But the industry started to buy into it. It was reluctance. People saying, don't want to invest in that sort of way. But it took off, and a lot of people who are now at the top of the industry have come out of that program and are doing very well. Some are earning a great deal more than I am, and also are multi-millionaires. They've done really well out of it. So because they were open to different ways of thinking, different approaches. And what we did was take approaches that were found in other sectors and said, surely this could be applied to ours. And as the customer centricity type of arguments started to move forward, then people said, well, we need to rethink this.
So how does this relate with your ventures with the IMI, and what was the next step there logically?
Well, I think from the IMI's perspective, we faced the issue, and we still do, that we've got 26,000 vacancies. And that becomes a big challenge that people don't want to work for us,
Mm.
you know. And we did some research into when we first launched the task force, which was about 3 years ago now, and we found that we were underrepresented on women,
Mm-hmm.
underrepresented ethnicity-wise, overrepresented on disability. That we have more people in the industry, in the sector, that are either dyslexic, dyscalculate, suffering from ADHD, some other anxiety, a whole range of other issues. And so therefore the industry had got this kind of view that it was male, misogynistic.
Mm.
It wasn't very tolerant of people. It was not a kind of a sector that people wanted to work in. And that's been manifested in the fact that we've got so many vacancies currently existing.
Yeah.
So I wrote an article in AM, and over the years, I've written over 100 articles in AM magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And I did wonder if anybody read any, but one of the things
that's automotive management for those that are
oh,
not
yeah,
in the know.
That's right, yeah, automotive management.
Yeah.
And I wrote this article saying that I felt we needed to be more embracing of the wider community. And a guy called Nathan Sawbridge, who was one of the, I think, 2 or 3 black dealer principals in the country, wrote to me and said, Jim, it's all very well you sort of writing about it. Why don't you actually do something? So it was the motivation to then go forward and launch this task force, which has got a whole series of resources behind it. We did it in a different way. A lot of people have gone down the EDI route by going, get an agency in to write an EDI policy. What we tried to do was go to the people with the lived experiences and say, right, okay, what is it that we need to do?
Yeah.
And we found situations when you did the research. We found a sales guy who was severely dyslexic and was really struggling, but was a great salesperson, great interpersonal skills. But he'd had to memorize most of the sales process, the FCA compliance and all that sort of stuff by rote because he couldn't read it. And as a result of that, at the end of each month, he traded a couple of sales to another salesperson to do the paperwork for him. And you're going, this can't be right. We need to be and have an understanding of who we've got and who we employ. And we don't. A lot of people have now changed their attitude and say, right, how many people could we enhance their performance within the workspace by just providing additional assistance, changing the colour of the paper, having a screen on the laptop which is a different colour that helps with dyslexia, a whole range of attitudes, just reasonable adaptations. And by doing that, we're hoping that we get more people in who are able to perform to fulfil their potential.
Yeah.
And so, but that's part of that. And obviously the IMI works with the 30% Club and Julia Muir in trying to work together to say, can we get the gender balance sorted in a better way, that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think, again, my exposure in my early years, and this is going right back to sort of year 2000, 2001, when I started out selling, it was, as you described, a very male-heavy industry, not necessarily seen as a profession, and that was seen and heard in the language that was used in the dealerships that I worked in, because now we refer to stores and retailers in a lot of brands, and there's been a transition in how retail is seen and heard. But a classic phrase I heard time and time again through my early career was, when there was a shortage of people, the big boss would say, we just need men in suits on the ground. And that has always stuck with me as a really unhelpful and negative comment about the industry.
Yeah, I think there's a number of stories that we don't onboard people very well either. We've had a situation where the industry loses something between 50 and 60% of new hires within the first year. And there was an example we had come up. I won't tell you which franchise and who, but it was a person. It was the son of a person who was fairly high up in the organisation, and the son came to work, and on the first day he came back and to the home and just cried. He said, "Dad, I can't do this." And the father was senior enough to be able to switch his son from new car sales into after sales. And the lad has thrived, has done tremendously well, really good. Mm. The issue that I came back to, and it's one of the things we do on a lot of courses now, is say, well, if it was your son or daughter, how would you want them to be treated on their first day at work? How would you want them to be trained and onboarded into the organisation? And when you start to think like that, then your whole attitude changes. You're not just trying to hire a man in a suit.
Yeah.
You're actually saying, right, this is an individual who has potential, massive potential, has development needs, but could be somebody who could be really useful, but also have a fulfilled life and lifestyle, etc., within our sector. And at the moment, still to some extent, we still trade off that work-life balance to a large extent.
Yeah, it's interesting. And coming back to a point you made earlier about this sort of EDI part, I've been fortunate enough to represent at head office level in a number of big brands. And you can see, again, the differentiators between retail at shop level and what's happening at brand level. There is more focus on the balance and getting the cultural elements right. But you were saying earlier, I thought was a really important point to labour is it's not just a policy. And some organisations do this as a bit of a tick. And I think what needs to be seen is that authentic and credible delivery of it through the leaders in the organisation.
Yeah, you have to have also role models and examples.
Yeah.
You can't say, oh, yes, we're going to recruit this particular type, but actually there's nobody there, and that type of thing. Also behaviours and the whole issue has to sort of change. And that's a lot to do with the culture. But if you talk to most of the senior people in the big dealer groups now, they're very, very positive about this type of action because they're just aware that they can't recruit people.
Yeah.
And you can't, and it's very difficult if you to be customer centric and it's all about relationship if you can't get the right people into the organisation.
Yeah. And during my time with a certain retailer group, I was an academy manager. We went on the venture of hiring outside of the industry. So we were targeting people that were front of house in hotels, restaurants and alike, or really good ambassadors in high street stores. And it was a very effective exercise in bringing on and onboarding new talent who were passionate about customers, who understood that there could be flexibility in the industry. And it actually switched on a different style within the existing leadership because they suddenly realized that there are some great people out there that we've just completely bypassed because we've been focused on men in suits, which is absolutely the wrong phrase and wrong existence. We shouldn't have an industry that's built around that stereotype. And I know, as you mentioned, Julia, fantastic person who is absolutely dedicated to getting that balance right and showing that the female audience and young females in particular are there looking for a profession and can do this really, really well.
And it is possible to be done. You see, that if you took the industry as a whole, the actual gender split is actually around about 18%. The people involved with the 30% club are nearer 30%. They're in the top 20s. So if you have a will and a commitment to doing it, you can actually make the accommodations which allow people to feel comfortable from whatever walk of society they come from, whichever gender, etc. Whatever it is where they come from, they should be able to feel comfortable. And in the past, there's been too much misogynistic behaviour. There's too much sort of issues of sexual harassment that have gone unchallenged and behaviours that need to be addressed.
So do you think that today's automotive industry is something that we can write about in the future and talk positively about, or are we still in this transition of good yet to come?
I think there are some examples of real excellence whereby, to some extent, I think the automotive industry is leading the rest of the UK industry. I think there's still a legacy part of the industry as well. Obviously, there's great big diversity of roles now. I think we're over 200 different roles within the industry. So I think it is becoming increasingly attractive. And we can just hope that we can get the traction going to attract people. At the moment, we're running the More to Motor campaign, which built on the diversity, equity, diversity, inclusion task force. And that's targeting young people. Most people in the industry haven't heard about it, but they're not the target market. And it's been supported by Peugeot. And what's happening is we're targeting regional areas along with the dealerships to attract people in and to say, look, these are the opportunities. And putting out the narrative and the examples of people working in the industry of that age and what their experience actually is. And if we can share those experiences, those positive things, then I think we've got a chance.
So that is fantastic to hear, that we are actively as an industry really trying to promote the modern retailer and the way of life from a sales floor level. But what about future leaders? What is happening, and what are you, the task force, and what can we be doing to really promote great behaviours and good leadership?
It's difficult because the leaders there's a transformation that has to take place in leadership thinking in the sector. In the past, it's always been regarded that the senior people know what's going on. We're in a state at the moment within the sector generally where the level of complexity is immense. It's very much more complicated than it was, say, 25 years ago. And everybody said then, oh, the industry's changing and all the rest of it. The change which is taking place at the moment is enormous. And that requires a different type of thinking and a different type of person. It needs somebody who is informed. They just don't need to know about their bit of the business. You have to have a bigger view on politics, economics, sociocultural trends, technology, legal, environmental issues. All of those factors come into play into the thinking of senior management now within the sector. And that includes the retailers as well as the manufacturers. Yeah,
that the terms of sort of strategic and thought leaders wouldn't have been heard way back, and now that's having the ability to convey a strategy to empower people to deliver is so important today in this industry.
But it's so difficult to do because it's one of the things about strategy is you need to know a lot about almost everything and be able to identify what the key factors are. And that complexity means that task is a lot more difficult. You have so many, the role of politicians and politics within the industry now is immense by comparison to what it used to be. Occasionally governments intervened at certain times with MOTs, the introduction of the Blair issue about diesel, the rest of it. You have times, block exemption, there are times when the industry has felt the impact of politicians. Now it's a different ballgame altogether.
So with today's challenges of selling new product, electrified product, what types of leaders do we need then to make sure that we are making our business profitable? Because that's always been the heart of any organisation, to be profitable, have market share, but also to employ and onboard great talent. What do we need now?
I think the biggest one is a change of mindset. The Arbinger Institute, which I rate quite highly, that they talked about very much an open mindset, an outward-looking mindset. And that sort of reinvents the thinking that you're starting from a position of humility. And it's always, I always quote the situation with Winston Churchill, that Churchill was actually a pretty poor leader. He was a poor strategist. He was responsible for a number of failures. He got demoted from First Sea Lord because of his failures, etc. But it was interesting that Kennedy said to him, what he did do was recognise what he could do, which he could, and that was he took the English language into battle. He basically makes speeches. Now, what you have to have is to say, look, the modern day leader, identify what you're good at, but identify where your weaknesses are. Identify what you don't know. Be aware of what you don't know. If you don't know what you don't know, you've got real problems. And so therefore, draw from a range of people. Not in isolation. This has to be a team effort. It has to be respecting the inputs of a range of different people. You can't be the sole fount of the knowledge. You have to be humble enough to say, I don't know, draw on that information. And I think that's the different kind of mindset that is taking place in the modern day leader, that they're saying it's almost like a servant leader. It's almost saying, right, let's listen to what other people are saying and go forward because I need to be better informed.
Yeah, and that's kind of the rallying the troops type of analogy. You don't need to necessarily be on the front line or doing the role, but you need to be able to inspire people to go towards their target.
Yeah, you need to engage with the people you're leading, but engage with them meaningfully. It's the definition of a leader is somebody who generates followers. But, basically, you've got to actually engage with them, but also respect and listen to what their opinion is, because they will have a different view of the world. They will look through it from a different lens to yourself. And therefore, you need to be able to embrace that, to actually keep them on board, but also to have the right strategy to take your organisation forward.
I just had some recent conversations with Dr. John Finn, who is author, founder of Tougher Minds and The Habit Mechanic. And we've talked extensively about creating healthy habits and making sure that people understand that they become this cultural architect in an organisation. And I think that's never been more important in today's industry because, as you say, you don't have to know everything. You just got to be able to have the capacity to influence people in a way that is meaningful and authentic. So with your career and your experience so far, what do you think has been the most important or most pivotal time day in the, say, last 20 years where the industry has shifted, and particularly the influence over the way that the businesses have been run, leaders have run the business?
I think there's the point when people started to realise you can't recruit. But then I think the biggest issue that we've obviously faced more recently is the net zero, that sort of stuff, that people are having to rethink it completely and go, well, there's an awful lot of range of different pressures on us now that haven't been generated by the customer, but have been generated by politicians. So in the same way as in 1971, when a politician stepped in and changed the whole kind of scenario of the UK car industry at that time, the net zero 2030, 2035, that sort of thing I think has been in the last 2 or 3 years had a real impact on the way people are thinking, coupled with the fact that we can't recruit. So therefore you're looking and saying, well, we need to address this issue. Otherwise it's not going to survive.
Yeah, I had some, on a personal level, some recent experience with Tesla. I'm a Tesla owner. The car itself does have a lot of technology. It does tend to attract a certain type of person. I just love it because it's easy. I've been driving EVs for 6 or 7 years, and I like the fact that it's got everything I need and it does it well. It absolutely has flaws, the product. But what I've seen in the transition of my ownership is this desire to go above and beyond with customer service. And I had a recent experience with a new store in Bicester, which was recently opened 2-3 weeks ago with brand new state-of-the-art facilities. And I went in for a service, and the young chap that was there to welcome me couldn't have been any more helpful. And I was talking to him about his background because I was curious to know where he'd worked before, and he'd never worked in the industry. And it struck me as, well, there is the first point. He was very focused on me. He was welcoming. It was a warm meet and greet, and he didn't work in the service department, which is where I was headed. But he couldn't do enough for me. Took me upstairs, got me onto the Wi-Fi, got me a coffee, sat down and talked about my car and what he liked about my car, and then we talked about product. And then it must have been 45 minutes into my wait. I was expecting to be there for 3 hours for the work that was required. He came up and said, would you like to come and have a look at the new model? Because there is the new version out now. I'll take you for a drive, or you can go on your own. And I said, that's very gracious of you, but I'm hoping I'll be away soon. And he said, well, look, there's no pressure here, but if you want to come back, just ask for me. I'll be very happy to take you out. And he talked about how they're not paid on the typical sort of structure. So whether that's true or not, I was left with this impression of, I believe him, and I believe that he wants to actually help me. And I left there thinking, do you know what? I would potentially consider another one of these products, even though there is now a wash of alternatives which didn't exist when I bought my car. It did make me think, that's what keeps customers with brands. So despite the noise that brand gets, on a personal level, that guy has potentially secured another sale for that.
But it's the whole issue, isn't it? That, we have spent years measuring satisfaction, and satisfaction is a lousy measure. Somebody did some research going back, I don't know, it's tin pot stuff, that if people are 100% satisfied, they will repurchase. It's rubbish. We had an example whereby there was somebody in Huddersfield who, a dealership in Huddersfield, I won't tell you which brand, and he was bottom for customer satisfaction, but number one for loyalty. It's not satisfaction. It's to do with relationship. That what you're doing, and people will stick with people and to some extent with brands, if the relationship is there, if the guy was basically building a relationship with you over intermittent visits, pop up, check you, etc. So therefore, you get to know him, and you feel you were buying into him and the brand at the same time. He was trying to form a relationship with you, and that's very much what it's about. So what you're doing is building a relationship, and that relationship is something which is ongoing. And will they walk away from him? No, because there's a relationship there,
and they're bought in. Yeah,
they're bought in.
Well, I think it's now a good time to take a break. So thanks so far for this really great chat. We'll be back with you shortly, just a couple of minutes. Thanks. This podcast is sponsored by Ignition. Do you want to raise your business to new heights? Give your clients a bird's eye view of what you can do? Well, let's talk to Ignition about their in-house drone operator services. Whether you're looking to produce beautiful aerial productions, add fly-through footage to your real estate marketing, or maybe even perform building inspections, whatever your aerial needs, with Ignition's in-house CAA qualified pilots, they can help your products and services really take off. Visit www.ignitiononline.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. Back with Jim now, and we were just talking about relationships before the break. And now I want to just pick up on, again, how we get people to understand that relationships and that value building is so important. Because as I mentioned, in my career, it was always about volume. It was always about making money. And the commission style leadership was very, very evident. Still exists today. However, businesses are switching on to people and needing to get the best out of people. And coming back to you, again, your huge amount of experience and influence over the industry, IMI is a very well recognized body for the automotive space. How are they supporting the future leaders, and what can we do more of in the industry to get the best out of the strategic leader?
I think there is a gap that needs to be filled. The quality of management leadership training generally is fairly sparse. Some of the manufacturers are doing a fantastic job. They run their own in-house programs. The various academies do that sort of thing. But generally, there isn't the kind of management and leadership programs out there that there used to be, even during my time at Loughborough. They seem to have kind of dissipated, especially post-COVID. COVID was a big hiatus for that sort of activity. So I think there is still a real need, which we're looking to try and address, to embrace a whole range of factors. Because when we talked about relationship, that's historically been very much about customer lifetime value. But now with electric vehicles and the issue that really you don't start making much money until you get to the second cycle and then potentially third cycle, then what you, as a salesperson or a dealership or a retailer, you're looking to not only keep the customer, but also keep the vehicle. Because obviously from that point of view, so that relationship becomes twofold, that it's important that you actually marry those two together so that you can, in fact, get good quality vehicles back to then move into second cycle. So it's that sort of difference which people are thinking, right, we have to change the attitude. It's not just a one transaction.
Yes.
This is something that has to build a relationship. That is often through after sales, but with EVs, there is less engagement on the after sales side. There's less money to be made on after sales because of you haven't got oil and all the rest of it. So therefore, it becomes an issue. So that issue about relationship is there. I don't think it's being catered for sufficiently at the moment within the sector. A lot of the OEMs are doing their best with their and some of the big dealer groups with their academies to introduce that sort of type of thinking.
Yeah, and you mentioned about that again milestone with COVID. I think that's probably because it was easy to push out product training. It was easier for people to consume one directional training, i.e. learn the new product, what's coming, and therefore they could do it remotely and do it at home. Whereas building relationships or understanding how to lead people and all the nuances that go with getting the best out of others and a team is highly complex, and there isn't necessarily one size fits all for that.
No, and it is very often you start to build that confidence when you have interaction with people, and people from different disciplines, different perspectives, people coming from different angles, even within the business. And that is something which I think is still missing, that those interactions. a number of manufacturers have come up with some really good programs to try to address that. But I think generally here within the sector, we're still way behind what a lot of other people are doing.
And that's where I'll do a little shameless plug. That's where ezeni and our parent company Ignition have really had our time spent, is in supporting brands more at the OEM level to help people get the best out of the people and upskill them with products. But that's small in comparison to the volume of newcomers into the field. We've talked earlier about the Chinese brands and all of the other new EV products that are around. Learning the product is one thing, and customer confidence does come from the knowledge of those salespeople. But it's about the message, and it's about making sure that people are empowered to go the extra mile.
And also the curriculum is changing as well. With connected vehicles, there's the whole issue about security and data security. We don't do background checks on staff. That's a big factor. But on how do you know that when you take your car in to be serviced, it's a bit like handing your laptop over, with all the passwords. How do you know that data is secure?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's one of the big issues that's buzzing around at the moment, sort of looking at how do we introduce security training within obviously the IMI TechSafe program. TechSafe is very much to do with how you deal with electric vehicles, but also how do you deal with the complexities around the connectivity within that vehicle. So there's a lot of work to be done, because that's to do with trust. That we need our customers come, and that they need to know that all that the data that car possesses about you can be trusted.
I must say, despite the fact that we're having a two-way about some of the challenges in the industry, whilst I am not on the front line selling anymore or managing teams in the front line, I still have a huge passion for the industry. I absolutely love the automotive space for what it brings, all of those differences in style, people and culture. How do you feel about the industry?
I'm very positive about it. Yeah. I like the people, which is the big thing. It's always different. Whatever you think is going to happen doesn't. Whatever there's the unpredictability. There's the dynamic. It's vital. It impacts people's lives. Just from the point of view that the number of people you see driving around in cars, the whole thing. And so, to me, it's a real challenge that we need to get this sort of right. We need to get the politics right. We need to get the economics right. We need to get the technology right. And if we can do that, then our industry is resilient, and we will have something going forward, which I think I'd like to be proud of for my kids and the next generations.
Agreed. I think what's really important from my perspective, again with children at home, is that in an ezeni sense, we talk about leadership being the person, but actually at this time it's about having leaders of change, advocates and ambassadors who understand what we need to do.
Yeah, and embracing what the young people of the future want. They want to have a world which is actually not polluted. They want to have a world where you can breathe clean air, that you can actually swim in the sea without having, the whole range of stuff. And our industry historically hasn't been particularly good when it comes to the environment. But what it did do was provide people with mobility and the ability to travel, which they didn't have before. And when you look back over the history, you see we have transformed a lot of people's lives. And I just hope that going forward, we can transform them for the better as opposed to the worse.
Great point. Final question to end on then, linked to that. If you could write a job description now, a job advert for the ideal leader for the new generation of product and how we're going to be profitable and circumvent some of the challenges of the politics, what would you want to see in that job advert? What types of skills or behavioural elements?
The ability to listen, the ability to think creatively, the ability to think critically, and the drive and passion that will take the organisation forward. To me, it starts with humility, creativity, critical thinking, and passion.
Mm. That's a great point to end on. And none other than two passionate people talking about the industry here. Thank you for a great conversation. And for those that haven't checked out any of Jim's work, you'll find many articles and insights across automotive management and many other sources. You've only got to put his name into Google. So, Jim, I can't thank you enough for joining me today.
Been a pleasure.
A pleasure too. And look forward to speaking to you again on another project.
Please do.
All the best.
Thank you.
Well, that was a really great chat, and a big thank you to Jim for travelling down from the north to meet with me. We could have easily continued chatting for well over an hour on this one, and his experience and expertise really shone and are absolutely phenomenal. Well, if you'd like to learn more about what was discussed in this episode, seek some support for your team or business, or you're taking the leap into your first leadership role and you need some advice, well, simply reach out to us here at ezeni by visiting www.ezeni.com or emailing us at hello@ezeni.com. That's EZENI.com. Thank you for joining me, and we look forward to having you back soon for another episode of Lead By, ezeni's leadership podcast.